started. Hi everyone, my name is Amber. I'm a 3L here at Mizzou. I'm originally from Houston. I'm the current Academic and Professional Development Chair for Blackwell Students Association, as well as this is a collaboration event with ACS, which is American Constitutional Society, and I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair. So, bringing this event on today with MIDMO, as well as some other different orgs. I'm also a board member for the Fellowship for Reconciliation, which is another one of these boards that helped us put on this event. So just gonna do a little bit of introduction, and then we'll hear from our panelists. So this is the execution without evidence event, the troubling case of Lance Shockley. We'll be hearing some compelling information today from speakers about Lance, who's scheduled to be executed 1 week from today. Tonight's event is sponsored by MU Bolsa, as well as ACS, MIDMO Fellowship for Reconciliation, Missourians to Abolish the Death Penalty, Mid-Missouri Civil Liberties Association, Death Penalty Action, MIDMO Peaceworks, and the MU Young Democratic Socialists of America. We'd like to extend a special thanks to Dean Lennon, as well as some of the other staff for allowing us to have this event tonight. We'd like to thank Kim Dill for creating the flyer. You guys can go and get one, as well as the one we sent out in the email. Jeff has some back there that you can write down your information to stay engaged with what we're doing. Tonight's event will also be live streamed via Death Penalty Action and can be viewed on their site later this week. And thanks to Valerie for sending the stream from here. It'll also be able to be viewed on MADP's YouTube channel and Facebook pages after tonight. There's also a couple different related activities that will be in conjunction with this event. So they will be doing a Columbia to Jeff City, a walk to stop the execution of Lance Shockley, which will take place the 13th and the 14th, which is Monday and Tuesday of next week. The walk will start Monday at 9:30 a.m. with a send-off, gathering with speakers, music, outside of the Boone County Courthouse, which is on Walnut Street, and the walk will conclude noon Tuesday in Jeff City at the governor's office on the second floor of the Capitol. You can check the QR code on this half sheet over here, and for more details, you can talk with Jeff, who's over there in the corner. The walk will be canceled if the governor halts the execution or the court issues a definite stay. If the execution is not halted, there will be a vigil for life taking place on Tuesday the 12th from noon to 1 outside of the governor's office in the Capitol, and then Columbia from 5 to 6 in front of the Boone County Courthouse. And you can check MADP's website for other vigils around the state. And then we have some speakers with us today. So the first one is Jeremy Weis. He's an assistant federal public defender at the Capitol Habeas Unit for the Western District of Missouri. Prior to joining the public defender's office, he was in private practice at Gaddy Weiss and a partner at Berkowitz Oliver in Kansas City. Jeremy has practiced almost exclusively in criminal law defense with an emphasis on capital habeas and white-collar criminal defense work. He attended William Jewell to attain his undergraduate degree and then attained his JD from Kansas. But we're not going to hold that against him. Next, we have Alyssa O'Brien. Alyssa is a mitigation specialist and for the Federal Public Defender's Office, also in the Capitol Habeas Unit, or CHU, for the Western District of Missouri. Alyssa received her master's in social work from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Prior to receiving her master's, she was in nonprofit management and involved with volunteering at the Midwest Innocence Project and facilitated philosophy programs at Lansing Correctional Center. Alyssa participated in a summer internship with CHU, where she fell in love with death penalty work and was hired shortly after graduating. Finally, we have Heidi Moore, and she's the executive director of Missourians to Abolish the Death Penalty, which is MADP, which is also what I've been referring to. Check out their website after this, where she leads statewide efforts to abolish the death penalty. Heidi has a PhD in public policy analysis from SLU and a Master's of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Central Missouri, and a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Drury University. Her career began at the Missouri Department of Corrections, where she worked at the Potosi Correctional Center, including working with individuals under a death sentence. She later directed reentry housing programs permitted through a Catholic nonprofit, serving people returning home after decades in prison, including veterans and others without community support. So those are our panelists. They're gonna tell us about the case, and then we should have some time later for questions. So, yes, thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming out. My name is Weis. I'm one of Lance's attorneys. We got appointed through the Federal Public Defender's Office back in, I think it was September of 2019, so right before the pandemic, right as he was coming out of his state habeas or state post-conviction appeals. So we got appointed. His case was pending in the Eastern District of Missouri, U.S. District Court, in front of Judge Stephen Clark. So we started. This is a picture of Lance. It's one of the ones I take pictures of clients as for part of our clemency. I've always hated the photos that they show, especially through the news media. They show our clients, in not very flattering light and don't really humanize them. So we have taken photos over the years, and these are some of the ones that we've used to kind of humanize our clients. They've clamped down on it a little bit over time about letting us take photos and how they do it, but we're still able to get some, I think, ones that kind of capture the individual as opposed to, as they are today, as opposed to the photos that they often want to show to the news media. So let me give you a quick overview of where we're at now. As I said, Lance, in 7 days, a little less than 7 days, is scheduled to be executed by the state of Missouri. We're obviously doing all that we can to prevent that and to stop that process any way legally that we can do it. So what we have now, we had presented clemency to Governor Kehoe. We do it through the General Counsel's office. So we met with General Counsel Lowell Pearson and one of his assistants, one of the deputies, who sat and listened for about an hour and 45 minutes to the presentation. Good presentation. We had 2 individuals that came that were members of Kairos that go into the prison and do spiritual presentations and spiritual weekends and activities who've known Lance for 10 years and longer. They came on their time to come and talk about him as a person and the person that they've gotten to know over the years. And then we had Dr. Skurich, who's a professor at the University of California, Irvine. He did a public poll that really tried to capture the Missouri voter sentiment about the death penalty in general, but then specifically, I'm given some generic information about Lance's case, whether they would be receptive to the governor granting clemency in his particular case. And overwhelmingly, even among Republicans, the numbers came out that they were in favor of that. So that was presented to him as well. We are recognizing that this is, while it is a legal case, it's also a human case, and it's also, for the governor, it's a political case. We have to recognize that it is. So when they make these decisions, they're making a decision that may not be against their political interests. So, we tried to address that a little bit. We're hoping that they make a moral choice, and that this is ultimately a moral choice for the governor, and that they're deciding that, the person that is in front of them obviously committed, that they're taking the position in most cases that this person committed the crime, and often they aren't necessarily open to different avenues or different interpretations or different outcomes. So we kind of start from the idea that they probably assume that our client is guilty, that they will accept, and in most cases they are, but in this case we have issues. But in most cases I think they're going to say, well, assuming this person committed the crime and the jury said they did, and their sentence and conviction has been upheld for years and years and years, we're going to accept that because we're not going to reinvestigate it if we go that route. So then they have to make the decision, is this person worthy of remaining alive, even though in most cases a jury has said that has recommended that they die after listening to the evidence. In Lance's particular case, it's kind of unique, less unique than it used to be, but it's unique in that the jury made up of members of actually his community. This was a local jury as opposed to one that in most death penalty cases, they're drawn from outside the jurisdiction because there's too many people know the witnesses, too many people have heard too much about it. But in this case, they actually made the decision, probably smartly, to give credit to trial lawyers for doing this, that they kept a local jury, in large part because Lance had a lot of firearms. I mean, from my perspective, he had, I think, 16 or 19 firearms. All of them were hunting rifles, shotguns, things like that. Now that, coming from somebody who I grew up in Southwest Missouri, but my family doesn't have guns. But I live in Kansas City. I don't like guns. I have kids, and 19 sounds like an arsenal to me. But for that community, that sounds like a good start. So they weren't thrown off by the idea that having that many firearms sort of suggested that they were a problem. So I think they did a really good job by keeping that. But it was really important because when we talk about the local community's idea of what should happen to the person in their community, it's sometimes hard in our death penalty cases because they're drawn from different communities. But this one was drawn from Carter County. So they listened to the evidence. Now they found Lance guilty. And I can honestly say, based on what they were presented, and they were presented a lot of really important information, but on what they were presented, I don't blame the jury for making the decision they did. But they still had doubts. And they had doubts enough that they could not decide that death was appropriate. So they didn't make that recommendation. But Missouri has a little bit of a quirk. There are two states, Indiana and Missouri, that allow the judge to go ahead and impose a death sentence even without a recommendation of the jury itself. So the judge didn't know at the time how many people had voted for life as opposed to death amongst the jury. He just knew that they hadn't been able to reach an agreement. He chose, a few months later, with a packed courtroom of law enforcement officers, as an elected member of the community, he decided that he was going to impose death on Lance, even though the jury didn't make that recommendation. It's a very unique case. There aren't that many that happen like this. Most states have banned that particular procedure, but Missouri still allows it. One thing that we've been proud of in this case, Alyssa was actually responsible for this. She reached out to former Chief Judge Wolf, who organized a letter supporting clemency signed by former Chief Judge Laura Denver Stith, along with 7 other judges, who said that we think, given the circumstances, that because of Missouri's court allowing a judge to impose their will, and in particular in a case where the judge is an elected member, that there's too much pressure to go ahead and impose the death penalty, and it makes it not really a reflection of the community's interest and the community's will, and it becomes more of a political decision. And so Alyssa organized that, made sure it happened, and we have that to be able to present, and it was presented to the Governor's Council. Let me talk a little bit, so that's where we are with clemency. We still have some litigation pending. We had a DNA case. He has sought DNA testing on evidence that was found and collected by the officers at the time, but never DNA tested. There were 16 different items. Only one was ever tested. They weren't able to come up with any match or anything, or able to come up with any DNA, relevant DNA from that. But we've asked that they do testing on 16 different items. The most relevant of which are 2 shotgun wads that were found at the crime scene. We can definitely tell were absolutely part of the offense. It's common within this part of the country, and a lot of people like to go ahead and pack their own shells. If these were packed shells, we don't know, and we can't tell from from the evidence that we have, there would be DNA on those. We just don't know. We've asked to have it tested. The state has opposed that and continues to oppose that, even though they have said confidently that Lance Shockley is the person who committed the crime. And they say it confidently, and they say it over and over and over again. Now, this is despite the fact, and I'll get into some of the facts of the case, this is a completely circumstantial case. No one places Lance at the scene. No one saw him anywhere near the scene of the crime that day. There is no gun to be tested against. While he had 16 guns or 19 guns, I can't remember which the number was, not a single one tested to be one of that. Not a single one of them was linked back to the crime. Family guns were taken. Not a single one came back. Friends' guns were taken, not a single one came back. They tested dozens and dozens and dozens of firearms, not a single one came back. So we don't have an eyewitness, we don't have a gun, we don't have forensics that link in there. So how do they do it? They rely on what I'll call the red car. So, or what they call the red car. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview about where this occurred. So this right here is the property. So this was Sergeant Graham's home, a rental home that he had in the community, just outside of Van Buren, Missouri. Right here, where this white vehicle is parked, would have been his police cruiser. This goes down to this area, and there's a berm area here that's kind of a little bit lower and has railroad ties that hold up kind of the wall. They believe that around this area is where the individual waited for hours. What they said was that Lance waited there for hours and hours and hours for the officer to come home and then shot him. Shot him with a rifle, which would have killed him at that time. It paralyzed him and killed him. But then the individual came up and then used the shotgun, the second gun, to shoot him twice to make sure that he was dead. And then, according to the state's evidence, he would have left the area. Let's see if I can pull this up. Yeah, there it is. Google Maps. So this was Sergeant Graham's home, and then up here is where the red car was purportedly parked, going this direction on a little tiny outer road. There was 2 homes on there. This house here was for sale, and this house here didn't have anybody in it at the time. So several people report seeing a red car parked on this side of the road, going the wrong direction. This was a road that wasn't used often. It's incredibly potholed. It's not paved. This is a highway that's very busy. This is elevated over this, and at this time of year, it was in March of 2005. There are leaves on the trees, and you can see directly now. During the time, there were 2 individuals that came and looked at the house to potentially purchase it. They noticed a red car. They thought it was a Pontiac. They thought that they saw a yellow sticker through the windshield, through the front windshield, looking at it. That's what they said to the police initially. The time of when they got there was important, and then when they left was also important, because what the police are trying to do, and what the investigators tried to do, and ultimately did successfully to the jury, was convince them that that red car was Lance's grandma May's car. She had a 2-door red Pontiac Grand Am that he had borrowed at some point during the course of that day. What they said is that that car didn't move, and was observed by several individuals up until the murder occurred, and then left shortly thereafter. And that timeline is really important, because that, according to the state, ties Lance to the location. Because they don't have, as I said, there's no eyewitness identification to put in there. So the identification of the car becomes really important, and the changing story becomes even more important. So let me show you the red car. So that's the red car. That is actually Granny Mae's red car. And when the Harts, who were initially questioned, they were questioned at their home, and they gave a statement about being able to see through the front, somewhere on there, through the back, either on the front windshield or the back windshield, a yellow sticker. Well, there's no yellow sticker on the front or the back. That's the yellow sticker. Could not be seen through the front. But as they're asked to come down for a second interview, this is the car they see sitting out front by itself in front of a lot of police vehicles. And she instantly says, that's the vehicle I saw. That's it. Changes her story to say, oh yeah, I definitely saw it on the back of the car. So, and then she's given a lineup. I know a lot of you are in law school. And not only did they show the individual or the car right before they go into the lineup, but does anybody notice anything unusual about the photos? The Granny Mae's are in the center section. Not to narrow it down, but is there anything that makes these unusual or makes Granny Mae's car stand out?
Some of them are 4 doors.
That's right. And it so happens that some of the people, because these are all taken from around the Van Buren community of 800 people, they knew some of the people's cars. So they already knew that they weren't them. They're all 4 doors except for Granny Mae's. And the only one parked in front of a bunch of police vehicles is Granny Mae's. But that's the car she saw, swears it. Now, if you had done a human line while the person's out waiting, and you walk the person that you want them to identify right in front of them, and then go in and put a 6'5" Mizzou basketball player, obviously uncoordinated and not very good at basketball. Sorry, I have to say that. And then compare it to, my kids, who are 4 foot or 5'2" and 5'10", and say which are, and obviously a different age, which is going to be. That's kind of what they did. And that would never have been allowed, but it was allowed here because it was a car, even though essentially it's the same. And it becomes really, really important, because if that car's not there, then Lance isn't there. It undermines the state's evidence. So they have another individual who testifies that he saw the car when he watched the end of a NASCAR race, left to go get stuff to barbecue, came back, forgot something, had to go back, noticed the car the first time, noticed it was gone the second time. His timeline concerns until it finally matches with what the state wants to do. Now, the trial lawyers in this, he had really good trial counsel. He had people from the state public defender's office in the central capital. They ended up getting conflicted off the case, kind of about 4.5 years into it after they'd taken depositions and everything. Lance's family was obviously frustrated, and they were going to get public defenders from Kansas City, but those public defenders weren't going to be able to try the case because they were involved in so many other trials at the time. And so they had to wait. And so, in an act of desperation, his grandparents hired 2 lawyers out of St. Louis who agreed to take the case for a really low fee and agreed to try the case in 8 months. Very clear they had not read everything, even though they said they did. They did no investigation. There is no possible way that they read I think we have 70 or 80 boxes. There's no possible way they read those in that 8 months of preparing. And they didn't do any investigation on their own. So they didn't understand the time. But within the state's own evidence, there were 2 individuals that saw Lance during the course of that day. And they saw him during the time that he's allegedly lying in wait for Officer Graham to return. That he's somewhere here. This is what they said. But he is seen 15 or 16 miles away near his own home in Eastwood, Missouri, driving not his grandma's car, but driving his pickup truck, which is very noticeable, as his neighbors would say. It's noticeable because it's loud. Makes a lot of noise. So let me show you where, let me show you a kind of overview about where it is. So this is down here. It's the only way to get back up to Lance's house. This is Eastwood, Missouri, so this is to the south and west of where the crime occurred by about 15, 16 miles. There's 3 homes on here. There's the Duncan house, where there's neighbors. You have to pass by the Duncan's house, and you pass within, having been out there, about 20 yards from their front door. And then you've got Granny Mae's house right here. And she didn't have a garage, so her bright red car sat out front. And then you had Lance's house at the end. So when Lance would come and go, the Duncans would hear him. And they heard him at that day, in the middle of the afternoon. They saw Granny Mae's car parked by 2 o'clock at her house. And they noted it because they thought they had gone to church. They thought she was going over to do some shopping. And they were surprised she was back as early as she was. But they never testified, even though the defense lawyers said at their opening they were going to call him. Just a little lesson. don't say you're gonna introduce evidence that you're not sure you're gonna introduce. So they said they were gonna call some witnesses and they never did. You don't have to commit to something like that. They did. There was also an individual that lived in the Eastwood area that waved to Lance about 2:30 in the afternoon, coming from the direction, would have been from the south here, coming from the direction of Lance's uncle. Lance's uncle also saw him come to the house that day, and in the middle of the afternoon. But they didn't testify because they weren't called. And the defenses, when they were questioned on it in post-conviction, said, we just thought that a partial alibi wouldn't be worth it because it didn't show where he was at the time of the crime. But here's the thing. This shows they didn't understand. Only way, literally the only way, that the state ties Lance to this crime is that he did it by himself. He took Grandma May's car, he parked it, he didn't move it. He committed the crime with 2 separate weapons, ran back to the car, drove back to his house. That's what they did. That is it. They don't have any other second person, ever. They've never had any evidence to support any second person. They've never even alleged it. And in fact, one of the things that they say was so key to it, and if true, it would be an aggravator, which is that he sat there for hours, thought about it, had a chance to walk away, do the right thing, and not kill that person. That is, if true, of course it's aggravating. But we can prove it's not true. That was never introduced. It was never done. We can also show that there were a number of other individuals that had lots of reasons to commit this crime. He was a law enforcement officer. There is nothing bad about this individual, and let me be very clear about this, that it is a tragedy that he died. No question. And it is horrible. But it is a tragedy if we execute the wrong person for it. We have to get this right. And I don't think we did in this case. There remains a lot of questions about Lance's case. There remains a lot of questions about the investigation that was undertaken. You know, we haven't released a lot of information. There are certainly other individuals that had motive, opportunity, expressed anger. You know, there was an individual that was very close to this, that, you know, was a former law enforcement person, lost his job because of a drug arrest. In his case, when his case was pending at the time, and it was arrested by Sergeant Graham, and he threatened Sergeant Graham, and it was on, you know, it's noted in the record, his case went away because he was the arresting officer. He's the one that found the drugs. So that case went away as soon as this person died. They didn't check the alibi of that individual. He was allegedly in Springfield at the time. But his girlfriend said, well, I didn't really see him. I think he was out working. And that's it. They just dropped it. They didn't do anything. They honed in on Lance as the suspect. And then they built it all around this time. But they had evidence showing, by their own investigation, they had evidence showing that Lance wasn't there the entire time. They, you know, worked it to the point that they were able to convince the jury. And I don't think that's sufficient. The jury had substantial questions about his guilt for the residual value. Under those circumstances, it seems cruel and inhumane to execute an individual with those same questions. And then you add on the fact that, you know, Alyssa's going to talk a lot about who he is as a person now, what he has done for the past 20 years, the kind of individual he has. Also, the things he has done with him. It was incredible. And I will tell you, having done this work, having presented cases since graduated law school in 1999, first time I ever presented a case to the governor's council was in 2001. And I have never had a case like Lance's, not even close. And a lot of our clients who have, you know, are going to come up over the next few years, and cases have expressed that Lance doesn't get clemency. What chance do I have? Because he is that kind of person. And I can tell you, this is my third scheduled execution in the past 18 months. two of which I lost. And for both of those individuals, the last person they talked to at prison was Lance. They prayed with him. In one case, he helped them write their last statement. He was that kind of person. That's the person they wanted to see before they weren't going to see anybody else. He just made that amount of an impact on them. He doesn't do it for the recognition. He didn't do it for us to be able to argue this. Getting this information out of him is incredibly hard. We learned so much through our investigation, not because Lance told us, but because other people tell us about it. And that is reflected in the tremendous work that our team has done. I will say this kind of work is really, really hard. And, we end up sort of getting, as lawyers, we end up getting a lot of credit for it. But I will tell you that what we present is only the result of all the hard work of the people on our team. Alyssa, Sophie Day, and a number of other people that do hours and hours and hours of going and talking to again and again and again. Records, all that stuff, all of that is done with all that they give us, and it's been tremendous. So, I also want to thank, I would be certainly remiss if she's going to shake her head, Caitlin from Mizzou, although don't love the law school, but she has been a tremendous help in this. Send it to me, but it's this is the timeline. I would encourage you to go and look. This is the thing that based on all the facts that developed through this goes to the timeline. It's really good on the website. This video. I was saying that for all of so as also talk about
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, I'm Alyssa. So I wanted to first of all, a little bit about what mitigation is. For those of you that don't know. So I just wanted to describe it a little bit, but so our investigation investigation by but in large part what we do like Jeremy said, a lot of times people are the state is so part of the job is to show that they are actually person. And a coworker she's on the well, she that state tries to patent. So we just try and full circle who this person is, what happened to them, and how that may have impacted big amount of time. So a lot of our clients will look something to traumatize children and years. Even though we believe that we have innocent, that does not mean that some is not presented at trial. So there was almost zero mitigation in the trial, such as he was very affected by his mother and stories about basically chasing her right money by so she really Um, so none of these were talked about at the trial. But nobody thinks, nobody just felt one day and said like, I'm gonna go out for the day of my life. And so that's what mitigation is. Look, let me see is advocacy for being that our case was very governor and Ryan sentence. So it was asked that the judge or gives a sentence back to later. So traditionally that's only happens in really Alabama last year. Hey, I be the governor of Alabama and she said, I am not convinced that Mr. Byers I am not so convinced so once again, it was a lot of people felt so picture of what happened to the child and so Jeremy touched on this a little bit as well, but Lance in general, it's a really good client. There are a lot of people that love Lance, and professional work is positive atmosphere. And as Jeremy said, there's a lot of problems that are surrounding Lance's case in the beginning. So, the recent thing, we started our negotiation about a year ago, and pretty quickly realized that this was not going to be regular. So Lance is very humble. So he did not really tell us about these things. I maybe touch on them, but like Jeremy said, we already talked about or really started stories about yeah, what is professional is. So, we actually started, we actually might have started. So, it was, I mean, that's when we had to do for college. Maybe people really, so we really got to state, he grew up not supposed to stay, his father passed away with pregnancy, kind of exactly Sunday, building on a lot of people and a lot of struggle with there. And then time comes in, and then it was still struggling there for kind of a moment and back started. So since he has been relieved to go into the state, he has served as a designated for the entire mission population. So that basically a lot of overseeing programs, making sure that services for the company will volunteer professional unit and that primarily about limitations, but also limitation and who specifically go to the scale and help facilitate all of these people's services that are not feeling like they're on a wheelchair, being the last one to service, or even take services to pay by counselor, make sure that they were being crisis. Bible studies and sermons, and students, which is literally takes down shoes, has just down like dish on and makes them very nice and good, and then basically kind of from different houses. The officers all, yes, one was having a mental health crisis or one of their friends just got killed. We told Lance to come home with the situation that there was a crisis. So in these events, like Lance is trying to get this in, but also and facilitate this relationship. So just like, I mean, seriously, you just stay all night. So he's a very, very special person. So he's also a father, school father, very, very successful, very public, he's very genuine. They get a lot of that from calling and emailing and listening. And they said, hey, they're from Aaron, which is really small town itself. It's just over there's a lot of stuff. A lot of campers. It's just it's pretty something like that. It's pretty it's not very common to have that much so we really made it next week, so we did our presentation last week. We had several pillars that we we had of course Lance today, who he is, and then all the great that he's doing. And even outside of we talked to a lot of guys that have been in business and how that their success, their sobriety, and talk all the time. And for them, all they were their jobs. And I was like, I pay taxes, you know. So just it's like the little things to talk about is that's one person, it's just always fun. The other two common pillars for the campaign are without no legal offense, no murder weapon, no life sentence. Then the jury, my the state relied extremely tight timeline, the red car, jump science. So another critical investigation was we actually went and talked to the jurors that were during the trial. And part of that is to really listen to the story and their interpretation of how the trial happened, what's happened with that. So more than one, the jurors acknowledged that they sure as was the trial. The ballistics didn't make any sense. Even one juror said that it would not have taken much more evidence for that to be swayed to not vote guilty during the guilt phase. These jurors did not get to vote at the end, but they could not get sentences to death. Several even stated that they did not vote for that because what if a murder weapon showed up? What if more evidence showed up? They not feel like they had that as a conscience. They signed declarations that say they not so that was a big part of our investigation. Well, in this case, like lots of times, jury in that judge was very like, oh, you know, what's done? So that's a big jurors. So since all of this evidence to government council and our right now, it's not just one thing or all of these right. But there's a lot of parts still.
I'm gonna give you, like I said, some billing stats for a minute, bear with me. Last year, the US executed 25 people. So far this year, the US has executed 34 people in 10 states. The United States is on a path to carry out more executions this year than it has since 2012, when it killed 43 people, and 2010, when we killed 48. South Carolina had 2 executions by firing squad earlier this year. On April 11th, a 3-person firing squad missed the heart directly. Instead, the wounds covered organs and allowed his heart to keep beating. A witness reported seeing the target and thinking, that's placed low. None of the bullets hit his heart directly. Meanwhile, Florida has expanded their capital punishment for crimes other than murder, and they are going after people for that. Missouri had this expansion proposed as legislation last year. I think it's going to be proposed again. It didn't make it off the floor, is my understanding, but like the fact that people are proposing expanding it. Friday is World Day Against the Death Penalty, and the state of Indiana will execute at midnight, World Day Against Death Penalty, the first of 6 men scheduled to be executed in 7 days by 6 different states, including Lance's scheduled execution, and Florida has one scheduled an hour before Lance. A record number for executions in November and December. And Alabama will again use the horrible death classification method. 3 of the men being killed in October on innocence claims. And thanks to John Grisham. And it's unfortunate for a time because his execution is scheduled just 2 days after Lance's, and it is eating up the media. Nothing against Mr. Robertson, but when you have this many executions in a time, it is Alabama. Nationally, they're ranked 3rd in state execution rates, according to death penalty information. In the past 5 years, Missouri has executed 12 people. We had 3 total 15. Secretary of the Army has the most execution of the Trump administration. Like a total of 8 executions scheduled, I support anything that saves life. So report this for us. Keto cannot grant Lance clemency. So this morning, international I don't know if you all learn about this in law school or not. They know how to 3 mile every movie. There's a death. Or any under that sentence could have some years. And it's scary. So I was the parole officer of that prison. I did not know Lance. Let me be clear, I've never met him. I personally believe Lance is innocent. I know not everyone's ready to say that, and I know that that's not, there's just some things people. Go in and out of housing unit for staff, and it's still controlled movement, but you get to participate in the activities that they've discussed. It is a cost center, but I think also makes it because they have reasons to people that did not have the best. They were often in land, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, this is my understanding. As an honor, he had freedom. They had a Father's Day event that he had planned that day. The warden let him participate knowing he had his death warrant. And it was for the prison. It wasn't just for Lance and his family. That night, they read him his death warrant. He is locked up. And he is locked up. So legal physics, physics. To what? And South Street. And then at some point, as a staff member, we that's there was center on Potosi ground. The night of an execution, he showed the Green Mile. I kid you not. It was not that DOC officials did not say that was okay. He could choose his movie. It was okay. He showed 120 days shot for drug treatment. And moving the state-sanctioned citizens to another prison where the staff don't know them as well. where the staff aren't as attached to the daily movements. I'm sure there's underlying reasons. It's one of those things, I don't know for a fact, I just know it's true. Advocates and a lot of people in the movement, and when I'm talking nationally, because no one can relate like those under they don't understand how people under death I will say have you all ever been in this session, Eugenia? So as the parole officer, I would go in there and we had one inmate, we had one resident. So the Christmas Ministry Society of St. Vincent de Paul will take a Christmas. They would take these and because later, not realizing they were dissolving in the water. For these men at Potosi, they're maximum security. Right now in Missouri County lands, we have 8 men living under a death sentence. 3 of those men are not competent enough for Missouri to kill. I mean, think about that for a second. We're holding them under a death sentence, working with doctors to get them competent enough then so that we can murder. I mean, just working in the like that's a fine line. Also didn't support station mark. Now, what happened and so other people could do the injections. All for your interest in this case, we do have a chance. It may not be this year. Lance has a chance, but we need you all to support the work they've been doing in the courts. But the courts don't take phone calls. At some point, we need to remind people when it comes time for election that who you vote in matters, even at the Supreme Court, even at the Court of Appeals. Call the governor. You can still call the governor's office. He has not made his decision. Governor Kehoe, people say to me, Heidi, why do you have a sliver of hope? Parsons was thinning out the death sentence. Because he's not Parsons. He is the first Catholic governor we've had since 1981. And the Catholic Mobilizing Network has been working nationally to educate that the death penalty is actually pro-life as well. And I'm not trying to get into the whole pro-life movement, just like I don't get into the whole abolishing prison movement. But the reality is the Pope has spoken, the Catholic Church has spoken, and they have been working and working and working. And that is why we have hope, I believe, with Kehoe. If Lance can't get this, Brian Dorsey. If they can keep Brian, we have no chance. And the only sad part, I was doing a rosary yesterday and talking about Lance. They did a rosary for Lance out of the Kansas City diocese, and I started crying near the end. And it's authentic. I have family members who have been incarcerated. I have a cousin who did 21 years on a sex case. He's back doing 9 federal on a non-violent case. I have 6 other family members that have been in and out of prison, and I'm a survivor of child and sexual abuse and assault who chose to work. No one in kindergarten or first grade says, I want to be an alcoholic. I want to be a drug addict. I want to be a murderer. I want to be a rapist. last week at a showing of a documentary in St. Louis. It's Innocence is Enough. I believe it's a showing produced by PBS out of Kansas City. It's live stream. You can stream it now on PBS. It's very interesting. It talks some about the Marcellus Williams Khalifa case as well as other cases. Someone who was exonerated, not under a death sentence, but he was at Potosi with Lance, came up to me afterward, and I knew him from at Potosi, and he said, "Lance is such a good guy, Heidi. I've run his case. I don't believe he did this. He didn't do this." And Lance would not go around saying, "I'm innocent." People who knew him didn't even or claimed innocence because he's worried about people. I've heard that time and time. Active. Sign some. Whatever it takes. We will keep petitions open. Join us in the walk next week if it makes it that far. But I encourage all of you. This is the case to approach family members and friends about the death penalty. When we have cases that are not as sympathetic and you're like, I don't want to approach that. I have family members who support the death penalty. I'm from rural Missouri. This is the case to approach them on. This is the case that people who support the death penalty can say, oh, well, that's not what I thought they were doing. I didn't realize they were convicting with all circumstantial evidence, no motive, no real defense put on, a deadlocked jury, a jury foreman that had issues. Go on istandwithlance.com if you haven't and read all the other issues that are more headline. This is the time to engage with people because Lance's case is a case that people can relate to. Lance's is one person that people can say, that might have been my son. We have a few cases like that throughout Missouri because we have executed innocent people, aside from just the statistics. So please, I encourage you all, sign some petitions, call the governor, repost on social media graphics to have people call the governor, but have conversation. It will take all of us. It will take people who not believe and align with every single one of our beliefs to get abolition, to get the judicial loophole passed. And if someone is okay with supporting us for judicial loophole, but they can't go for abolition, that is okay. We need this judicial loophole. There are 9 pending cases right now at the state level of capital punishment. One of them, the jury's under deliberations out of Clay County. It does not look good for him at all. It is another law enforcement case. There's another law enforcement case in, isn't it down by Warrenton in Washington?
Gasconade.
Gasconade, thank you. And so it is important. Lance and one other person right now are the only 2 out of the 8 that are under this judicial loophole currently. But it is important to get legislation passed. Working on it this spring with people in the state. Do if you care, if you can. Thank you for your work. And remember, work of you and you from the Public Defender's Office and your unit. I mean, we have lawyers who care in this state. Regardless of the outcomes of the cases, it's not because they don't give a damn. Thank you. I guess if anybody,
You guys have that? About the phone.
I knew you were gonna ask.
I guess if anybody has any questions, or any thoughts.
Well, I wrote a long letter. Clay on Kehoe's. He claims to be quite a devout Catholic, former bishop who just left to become an archbishop. And, the church stands firmly in opposition to the death penalty. If he wants to lay claim to this faith, then he needs to show that. But what I fear is that they lay claim more to their politics. And while the death penalty has happened under Democrats and Republicans throughout the course of the reinstitution of the death penalty in this state, they're on a rampage. And every time we have a Republican in, they're on a rampage to get these people executed. You cannot avoid seeing this.
I agree. I would also say though, let's give Kehoe a sliver of the benefit of the doubt, please.
Well, let's put some pressure on him.
Well, we have it.
He's a man of faith. No, let's put some pressure on that.
No, we
He lays
have it.
claim to that.
We are lucky here in Missouri. Not all states have every bishop aligned against the death penalty as a pro-life thing. We are lucky here. We are lucky to have Mary Fox at the St. Louis Archdiocese as a volunteer going out and educating people about the death penalty. As a member of the church now. She was former head of the Capital Litigation Unit
Of the whole agency.
of the whole Missouri State Public Defender. She started educating people. But I believe we need to give Kehoe a sliver. Thank you for the letter. I am aware of over 100 other Catholics who wrote letters signed off of priests and sisters. But all the bishops came together and also gave him a letter. And there's other high-ranking Catholics, well-known Catholics, that have reached out to him that we're not at liberty to tell you about because we're asking them. I asked them, I believe others have asked them. This is private communication. To get through to Kehoe, it doesn't have to be a public calling him out like what happened today at our press conference. It can be a private one-on-one. And then we hold him accountable. I understand, I appreciate the letter, and I hope that they read them. And I agree, his pro-life. But I said months ago that we have to believe, based upon everything in Kehoe's past, based upon his wife, his children, all of them, in terms of their Catholicism, and going to the Catholic schools and volunteering, and all of those connections, that he places God above the Republican Party. He may not. He may not. I had no hope that Parsons did, but I at least have a sliver of hope that Kehoe did. And one reason is because he appointed Catherine Hanaway instead of someone else. Granted, she supports the death penalty, but she's better than Bailey. And I will say, I think she's also Catholic. But he could have appointed someone or some people with much less integrity than her. And again, that adds in a second sliver of hope for me. We'll see what happens. Keep the pressure up on him. Start attending Mass in Jefferson City with him.
The phone number for the governor, if anyone wants to write this down, is 573-751-3222.
Did.
You can call multiple times. One time.
I have a question, a legal question. Okay, so clemency, is it typically a week out? Like, why was the clemency presentation a couple days ago? He scheduled them all in a bulk?
No, it was really at our request. Typically, we've done it usually a couple of weeks out. That gives us time to finish all the investigation, finish the, get letters, do all the work that we need to do. And then, we present with everything. State that the governor has full control over that process. There is a form that we have to fill out for the Board of Probation Parole. That's literally it.
Right, they deny your presentation?
No, actually, there's nothing that we make to them. So in some states, our colleagues have a client that's scheduled for execution on Friday in Indiana. There was actually a full public hearing in front of the clemency board. That's not what we do here. Ours is an informal process that is done through the governor's office. So in previous, I said I've done this for a long time, up until Governor Greitens, I had never met with the general counsel. I'd always met with one of the assistants. So it wasn't until that point that we started meeting with them, and that became kind of the norm. But it's, it's an informal process.
And he's new, so he's never granted one before. Would this be his first?
The governor is, the general counsel was general counsel for the last 2 years of Governor Blunt's administration. He's been around a long time and done a lot of stuff. He was in private practice for a long time.
So with probation and parole, is when someone's given their death warrant, they get locked up, the second person, or this used to be the process, let me clarify. The second visitor would be the institutional parole officer, me. And I'd say, hey, you just got your death warrant read. You know, what do you say? You explain to them that someone from probation and parole, it would be my supervisor, will come visit with them to try to do an interview. The name can refuse the interview. Some participate. Then that person goes and writes a secretive report that's submitted to the Board of Probation and Parole, which remains secret, and a recommendation is supposedly made to the governor, which remains secret, and then the governor does whatever the governor wants, because probation and parole is a secretive process. So, and it gets confused by people who work in other states for the reasons that you said, because each state's different.
I also have a couple of legal questions. So, can you tell us more about the evidence that was introduced at trial? So if my understanding is correct, the jury still returned a guilty verdict. They just couldn't come to agreement when, as far as sentencing. So that's my first question, and also like how they started suspecting with the investigation. And also how the case was able to survive the appeals process up to now that there are some deficiencies.
Sure. I'll start with
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So, Jen, a number of questions. One was the jury obviously found him guilty, and what was some of the evidence that they relied on to do that? Why was investigative topic or person of interest? Where we're here, we've had some more evidence successful so far. So the reason is he was involved in a drunk driving accident in November, basically, I think it was actually Thanksgiving Day of 2004. He and his best friend, Jeff Bayless, were riding around in his truck and were back roads, and they lost control of the car. Lance lost control of the car, and Lance survived, but his friend Jeff didn't. He was killed in the car accident. And Lance went to a local house, person he knew, called his wife, and Jeff's girlfriend was Lance's sister-in-law. So they come down, get him, he goes back, and he's investigated for that because it's his pickup truck there. And the investigating officer is Sergeant Graham. So the state's theory always was that the reason, the motive for Lance to kill him was that it would stop the investigation. That's not true, because the investigation wasn't dependent on Sergeant Graham at all. But that was certainly their theory. The evidence to, that gave him the motive. There were some other things that, that the state relied on that were, a challenge for Lance's team to explain, he didn't have an alibi, for the time. Not that he's required to, but they didn't, they could show that he definitely borrowed his grandma's car. There was a dispute about when he returned it and things like that. In terms of how it got to the point where it got, I don't entirely know. I I mean, some of the evidence that we uncovered, and I say this is the royal we, again, not me, it's all of our investigators. When we made it to federal court, which I think was our best opportunity at the time, at the time that we filed the petition, there was a case that allowed us, out of the U.S. Supreme Court, Martinez, that allowed us to bring claims that had not been raised by any of the lawyers at the state court and be able to present evidence to support those. During the time that was pending, the Supreme Court reversed that 10-year old precedent and decided, well, no, you can't do that. That doesn't meet the statutory requirements. So a lot of our claims we never got to present evidence on. Now we presented it to the court, in terms of affidavits and things like that, but ultimately we weren't able to prove those because the court would not accept additional new evidence at that point in time. So I think a lot of our claims were lost. We filed a 550-page petition with, I can't remember how many, 28 some claims or something like that, many of which were thrown out almost immediately because of the rule change that all occurred during the bill. So I think that's largely why where we're at now.
You've said that the defense attorney didn't really present any defense. What was their theory?
It was so their theory was that there wasn't sufficient evidence they didn't have sufficient evidence to tie to it. So again, talking about the fact that they didn't have a gun, that they didn't have an eyewitness. There were actually 2 forensic people that testified. They tried to tie. They were able to recover the bullet that was found in the officer. They tried to tie that to some bullets that were recovered from Lance Shockley's uncle's house from a carcass of a dog, a feral dog that had been shot. And so they were able to recover those rounds, and then the forensic examiner who worked for the Missouri Highway Patrol said that those were a match. But the state then hired a second person who was a former FBI examiner who had retired but was still doing it privately, and he said there wasn't sufficient information to match it. They couldn't tell you between, and I'm not a gun expert by any stretch, whether there was a 243 or there were 2 different, a 2.2 or a 2.4 class of weapons, because the amount of material left from the bullet that was recovered from the body was not sufficient to tell, because it went through bone and things like that, so it gets disfigured, so they can't necessarily tell the exact size of the shell. So within a range of firearms. And within that range, there are tens of thousands of guns that could have fired it potentially. And then it's up to the examiner to determine, kind of like a fingerprint, how many points of similarity are there, and is that sufficient to say that it is similar enough to say that they can't say it's a match, but they say it's consistent with. But again, the FBI examiner, who was independent, said no. The one who worked for the Highway Patrol said yes. He actually, when having to testify at post-conviction, sent an email to the prosecutor saying, I don't know that I can back up my testimony any longer. Sent an email. A couple days later, he talked to him and said, "Okay, I'm done." So, we kind of view that as junk science to begin with. It is allowed under Missouri law, under Missouri evidentiary rules, and most states, I think every state allows it. But being able to say that that's sufficient to tie it to it is really a stretch.
Did they bring their own expert, the defense?
No, they didn't hire anyone. And I mean, to a degree, because you had the far more experienced individual that said that it wasn't a match, so I guess I can kind of see why they wouldn't, but it was also consistent with them not doing much work. So.
I watch a lot of Perry Mason, and what he does at times is he goes to the scene of the crime and then backtracks. What kind of effort has been done to do that? They found that someone was hiding behind a wall, But how did he get to the wall? Did they go back beyond that and follow leads of the real perpetrator of this murder?
So the way they determined the location of it was two things. One, there was and they're not 100% sure, but it's probably accurate, based on the angle at which the bullet entered Sergeant Graham. They can tell based on his size and the angle at which where the bullet would have been. And there was also on the ties themselves, there was a chip that appeared to be fresh from the wood itself. So they think it probably came from that. We've actually walked that whole thing. We've actually driven, the officers drove 3 different directions from that location to Lance's home and got various times. We did the same kind of thing ourselves. So yeah, we've been on scene and done all that stuff. We're pretty sure. The thing that's always been strange is that it's 2 firearms that nobody noticed. Again, it's not that far off a very busy road. That somebody would be running through that area with both a shotgun and a rifle seems a little bit unusual.
How was your presentation received by the governor's staff that you made the presentation to?
Well, neither of us were in there for that. So, but we were there talking to them, very interested in certain parts of it. So, and very cordial and open to receiving any information we wanted, and we've supplemented that since then. So, we do get the sense. I talked to him to set the meeting up a few months ago, and very complimentary of kind of the job we have, what we have to do, and they do appear to be taking it very seriously. And that's, to be honest, that's all we can request, because we have certainly been involved in others where I have walked out of those meetings and I knew it wasn't happening. In fact, I ran into we all grouped up for lunch, and I didn't see him initially, but he came over and saw me. He was the general counsel I dealt with under the last 2 executions last year. He was there at the coffee shop, and he came up and said hi to me and said, well, basically said that we never really had a shot under him. And that was definitely clear from our meetings.
Previous governor was an old sheriff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So far.
Yeah.
About 8 now. Thanks so much for attending, guys. If you haven't checked in on the QR code, just scan it if you can. And that'll just track the numbers so the school lets us do things like this. Because if you book a room and then nobody shows up, we're gonna say, you can't book it again. So, yeah, scan the QR code.